mentioned that the role of the Sadducees was pretty important in understanding where these questions are coming from. Well, the Sadducee had a religious role, but they also had a very large socio-political role. In fact, the religious role that they had was to care for everything in the temple. You know, the Pharisees took care of the day-to-day living and helping people live out the Torah, where the Sadducees were all about the temple sacrifice. But that was part of their job. The other part was very political. They were the administrators for the state domestically. They represented the state internationally. They participated in the Sanhedrin, the court, and often encountered the Pharisees there, and they collected taxes. These also came in the form of international tribute from Jews that were spread out in the diaspora. And they equipped and led the army. Pretty tied into the state. And I just realized I had not organized my notes from the first service. So, the gospel reading from Luke opens with this intrigue about the Sadducees, these social political leaders, people tied into Rome. And these people had a clear understanding that there was no resurrection, and they're asking Jesus questions about something that they had already resolved. Now, questions have many functions in conversations. Often, questions are to gain knowledge and comprehension about something. They're questions to help us analyze and assess a situation. Sometimes questions are to challenge authority, or maybe to shame an opponent, or win an argument or a debate. Questions often give the opponent the advantage, as the question sets or reframes the question. You've noticed people that don't want to answer a question will ask a question to kind of reframe the question and go in a different direction, because the one who asks the question has the power. I unfortunately tend not to ask enough questions, and this isn't about power. I marvel at some of my friends that can go into a group of people that I already know, and they don't know, and they ask such caring, careful questions and get so much more information and find out things about the person that I never knew, and yet I knew the person. But the Sadducees aren't asking those kinds of questions. They're asking Jesus about a mystery that they have already reflected on and they have rejected. Their questions are not for the purpose of genuine dialogue or conversation or trying to help educate the people. But this question is for the purpose of making Jesus look bad in front of the crowd and make him look like he's not trustworthy, and he certainly isn't knowledgeable about the things of God. But Jesus uses this gotcha moment as a teachable moment about the nature of God's kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. Rather than taking it as a personal attack, because he's a really self-differentiated leader that doesn't take it personally, at least not in the recorded word that we have, Jesus uses this moment as a time to teach them about the love and the mercy of God and what that has to do with the socio-political stature of the person in question. Jesus answers the question by describing what God's kingdom looks like. The ways of God are not the ways of humanity. God's judgments are not our judgments. Things do not work the same in God's kingdom on earth as it is in heaven, And thank God for that. Jesus answers the question by saying that in heaven, in God's kingdom, the lowliest of society would be considered like angels and are children of God being children of the resurrection. The lowliest. So this radical statement of the gospel that in heaven, God's kingdom on earth as in heaven, there is no socio-political strata. And this is good news, especially for today. The mystery of resurrection revealed by Jesus is that in God's kingdom, there is a place where those who have been dehumanized will be restored. That those who are oppressed will be set free. That those who have been treated as inferior will be raised up and they will be called beloved. Women will no longer be the property of men, treated as possessions, as chattel, passed from man to man to man at will and whim. Women will be children of God, able to love and receive love as they determine and seem fit, on earth as it is in heaven. Remember those words. It's not just in heaven, but on earth as it is in heaven. They will know the joy and peace that was kept from them. Jesus says in verse 38 that God is the God of the living, the God of newness, the God of forgiveness, the God of liberation. Persons suffering under oppression and those who are victims of the dehumanizing systems of racism, of sexism, of classism, of heterosexism, often struggle to look beyond what's happening today, today's reality, that would keep their backs bent and their minds unable to see an alternative, unable to see even the promise of freedom. And unfortunately, sometimes the words that come out of preachers' mouths like, bind people up. Often victims of oppression tend to believe how it is today will determine how it will always be. That suffering keeps people imagining new possibilities, but faith provides hope. In the children's story that I started today, we're going to finish next week, and we're going to hear how his name of suffering turns into blessing, and how a person needed to help him with that. The suffering and the hope of enslaved people in North America portrays the transformation of suffering through faith. Slavery in North America, our country, is considered one of the most inhumane and dehumanizing systems of oppression ever forced upon people by others. We are still suffering from that pain. During this time of forced labor and exploitation, enslaved Africans were forbidden to read or write, especially if they were caught with a book, especially the Bible, they were to receive severe penalties. The slave owners would cut off hands, they would gouge out eyes, they would suffer severe lashings with a bullwhip. This time of brutality and violence would have brought genocide to the people had it not been for their faith in a God. God is the God of the living and not the dead. In other words, the faith of the enslaved Africans told them that things in heaven would be different. This steadfast belief is captured throughout the spirituals. The spirituals, as you know, are songs written during a slave during slavery provide us a glimpse into what gave the slaves hope of heaven on earth. In these songs, we hear the profound hope of people who knew personally and passionately the good news of Jesus' resurrection, and who understood themselves as children of God, even while being told they were 2/3 human. The song, "I've Got a Robe," is an example of the slaves' theological imagination. They saw themselves in a different situation regardless of the current horror. This song echoes Jesus' response to the Sadducees by proclaiming God's love and cares for the disenfranchised, the widows, and those persons that are considered disposable, discardable, and exploitable by law and the will of the oppressor. We have over and over when there is a compromise, it often has placed on the backs of the very oppressed. But the song, written by persons who were forbidden to own land and whose children and loved ones were often sold away from them, boldly describes a heaven where their worth and their dignity are restored. The song is in resistance and in defiance of dehumanization and hatred, and it says, "I've got a robe, you've got a robe, all of God's children got a robe. When I get to heaven, glowing, put on my robe, gonna shout to all God's heaven." As if this courageous faith statement is not extraordinary in and of itself. In the next stanza, the writer-singer takes a swipe at their captives and proclaims God's judgment on the unjust, singing, "Everybody talking about heaven ain't going there. Heaven, heaven, gonna shout all over God's heaven, gonna shout all over God's heaven." The good news of Jesus Christ is that God is the God of the oppressed, and the children of God will not be forsaken, even in death. We have this wisdom from Jesus. We have examples of this faith and belief in our Wesleyan tradition, and we are strengthened by that for our own lives here on earth as it is in heaven, as we walk this Christian journey together. Thanks be to God for the saints of the church that give us the encouragement to keep on keeping on. Thanks be to God.